December 19, 1944. Winter had tightened its grip around the throat of Belgium in a suffocation. On the frozen wastelands of the Ardennes, the air was cold enough to freeze a man's breath right inside his aching lungs. Just north of Bastogne, outside an insignificant hamlet called Noville, a heavy fog hung like a thick shroud over the earth. It suffocated visibility, plunging the world into a white chaotic void where the armored elite of the German were mocked meta ghost. This anomaly defied everything learned on the Eastern Front-end radio channels, work logged with hysterical field reports. Urgent dispatches flooded back to headquarters of the 2nd Panzer Division, saying we have engaged a major heavy force. The reports were laced with panic describing American tanks that seemed to violate the laws of physics emerging from mist. They materialized like phantoms firing point blank into German flanks, then vanishing into the white nothingness again. It vanished accompanied only by the high-pitched scream of an aircraft engine, and minutes later, the nightmare repeated. But this time, the muzzle flash would tear through the fog from the completely opposite direction, throwing intel into chaos. Operations officers at the 2nd Panzer Division stared at maps, with trembling hands circling the village of Noville in Reed. They were convinced they had collided head-on with a full American armored division, or perhaps an even larger, Allied trap. How else could they explain this state of siege, where every square inch of air seemed to hide a deadly gun barrel waiting? But history was playing a cruel joke on the Germans that froze in mourning, as standing in the way was not a massive steel tide. It was not an army of hundreds of Sherman tanks, but merely a handful of American tank destroyers waiting in the mist. But reality delivered a brutal slap to the German war machine as the Germans with the best guns and thickest armor missed. This is the story of the M18 Hellcat, the fastest, most lethal, and most insane tracked combat vehicle of World War II. On that scorched frozen winter day, speed for the first time in a head-to-head battle arrogantly humiliated armor. To truly understand why the Battle of Noville turned into a one-sided hunt that terrified the Wehrmacht, we must climb inside. We must climb inside the belly of those German steel monsters to understand the fatal flaw that doomed them from the start. Late-war Nazi Germany was obsessed with building the largest killing machines on land, like the Tiger and the Panther. Names that are synonymous with death-possessing frontal armor that was nearly impervious and carrying long-barreled cannons. They carried cannons capable of tearing through any Allied tank from 2 kilometers away, and if you were an Allied commander. If you saw the silhouette of a Tiger across an open field, your only tactical option was usually to pray bail out and run. But these seemingly perfect war machines hit a deadly Achilles heel, which did not come from the quality of their steel. It came from a mechanical principle long ignored by German engineers, yet exploited by Americans, called the turret traverse. The rotation of a German heavy tank turret relied heavily on hydraulic pumps powered by the main engine of the vehicle. On paper, it was a brilliant design, but on the battlefield it was a death sentence, meaning turret rotation speed was tied. The speed was held hostage by the RPM of the engine. Take the dreaded Tiger I, for example, when its Maybach engine roared. When roaring at high RPMs, the massive turret could complete a 360-degree rotation in about 60 seconds. However, the real disaster struck when the engine was at idle, as a tank cannot fight with its engine redlining forever. In most ambushes, defensive stands, or while lying in wait, the vehicle is stationary, the engine purring at low idle. In this state, hydraulic pressure plummets, as at idle it took the same Tiger tank a staggering for minutes to rotate. Close your eyes and imagine that despairing image: a target appears in your periscope, charging your flank, and your gun barrel moves. You watch the enemy close, and you watch his gun align with your Holland. The control stick feels useless. And if the hydraulic system failed, which was a common occurrence in the mud of the east and the snow of the west, then the unfortunate gunner had to rely on the manual hand crank to rotate the heavy turret. You had to crank that heavy wheel like a madman 720 full revolutions just to turn the turret once. Your arms would burn, your lungs would scream, and long before you finished those turns, you would be burning corpses. Even the more agile Panther tank, while not as sluggish as the Tiger, could not escape this time-lag curse. In a stationary combat state, traversing 90 degrees to face a sudden flank threat took 15 to 20 seconds. 15 to 20 seconds for a man sipping coffee in an office that is just a moment to daydream. But for the M18 Hellcat, those 15 seconds were the dividing line between life and death. Those 15 seconds were enough to run a sprint that would rewrite destiny. This was exactly the effect Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce had dreamed of. He was the architect of the U.S. Army Tank Destroyer Center, a man regarded by many traditional armored officers of the time as a lunatic. Back in 1941, when the world's armies were scrambling for thicker armor and heavier tanks, Bruce proposed a heretical theory. He had studied the Nazi blitzkrieg and analyzed every catastrophic failure of Allied tanks. He concluded that trying to go toe-to-toe with German heavy armor using medium tanks was suicide. No matter how much armor you added, the German guns would penetrate it. If you cannot block the punch, why wear the heavy armor? Bruce's philosophy was simple, cold, and possessed a brutal kind of beauty. A tank destroyer must not be a knight in shining armor. It must be an assassin with a dagger. It must be a boxer, not a punching bag. Its mission was singular. Before the enemy turret could traverse, use extreme speed to flank or get behind them. The army brass thought he was crazy, and they thought he was sending soldiers to their deaths. But Bruce insisted in modern war speed is life. If you can run faster than the enemy can aim, you are invincible. And so the Buick Motor Division, a company that built comfortable sedans in peacetime, received this contract in 1942. Harley Earl's design team took over. Yes, the same man who would later define the exaggerated tail fins of 1950s American cars. These civilian engineers, thinking like sports car builders, created a machine of war. The resulting M18 Hellcat was a product of extremism. It weighed only 18 tons. To put that in perspective, a Tiger weighed 57 tons, a Panther 45, and even the standard Sherman was over 30 tons. The M18 was as light as a feather because the engineers had stripped away the armor with manic intensity, reducing weight. The frontal hull armor was 13 millimeters thick, just 13 millimeters. That is not armor, that is barely a mild steel skin. At close range, a heavy machine gun or even a high-powered rifle could punch right through it like it was nothing. The turret front was only slightly better at 25 millimeters, but on the battlefield this protection was as fragile as cardboard. When the first crews saw the specifications on paper, they were absolutely terrified by what they were reading. They looked at that pitiful steel and felt they were being ordered to charge into battle in an aluminum coffin. Veterans joked grimly that the only point of this steel is to keep the wind off us so we do not wet our pants in the cold. But this tin coffin had the heart of a beast. It was equipped with a Wright R975 Whirlwind 9-cylinder radial engine. Note this well, this was not a tank engine. It was an aircraft engine that carried the high-pitched whine of aviation power. While the Sherman tank used a similar engine, the Sherman was nearly twice the weight of the Hellcat, dragging it down. This was like stuffing a high-performance Ferrari V12 engine into a tiny go-kart, and the result was absolutely jaw-dropping. The M18 Hellcat hit a top road speed of 55 miles per hour, which is 88 kilometers per hour, and even off-road it flew. It was the fastest tracked combat vehicle of World War II, bar none, leaving everything else in its dust. Its torsion bar suspension combined with that screaming radial engine meant that moving across a battlefield did not feel like driving. It felt like low altitude flying across the battlefield rather than driving a tank on the rough ground. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce was betting the lives of thousands of American G's on a single dangerous premise. He bet that your movement speed is faster than the German reaction speed, asking crews to trade steel for velocity. He trusted that if they ran fast enough, even the Reaper himself would be left gasping for breath behind them. This radical theory faced its ultimate test in the frozen hells Cape of the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. Let us return to December 19, 1940, for to Noville, where the morning air smelled of cordet. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had been rushed to Bastogne to support the encircled 101st Airborne. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton, but in the chaos the unit was fractured and split apart. A detachment joined Team D, so WWII, a mixed task force led by a young Major, William B. So WWII, who was 26. He had a handful of infantry and a few tanks, and he was about to face the tidal wave of the German 2nd Panzer Division. The conditions were atrocious as fog locked down the village of Noville, cutting visibility to less than 50 meters. At that close range, the combatants were practically smashing their faces together in a blind and brutal melee. With a paper-thin M18, this should have been a death sentence, as at this distance the Germans did not need to aim. Any hit from a German gun would turn a Hellcat into shrapnel, and every second of stillness was an invitation to death. But the Hellcat crews adapted with astonishing speed, turning the deadly fog from a liability into a weapon. The commander peeked his head out of the open turrets, squinting through the thick mist, desperately searching for any movement. Suddenly, a massive, jagged silhouette loomed out of the white, showing the distinctive, overlapping road wheels of a Panther. It was close enough to hear the squeal of ice being crushed under its heavy tracks, sounding like breaking bones. The Hellcat gunner held his breath, spinning the lightweight turret, then boom! The 76mm gun roared aloud. At this range, even the Panther's vaunted frontal armor was at risk, but the Hellcat aimed for the turret, a tring weakness. The German tank shuddered violently, smoke pouring from its vents, indicating a critical hit inside the steel machine. But that was not the brilliant part, as the true brilliance happened in the critical seconds after the shot was fired. The Hellcat crew did not hesitate for a microsecond before the echo faded. The driver slammed the accelerator pedal. The R-975 aircraft engine screamed, tracks spewing mud and snow, as the vehicle shot backward like a wild cat. By the time other German tanks in the column laboriously cranked their heavy turrets to unleash hell, the Hellcat was gone. Utilizing its terrifying acceleration, it had relocated to a new firing position 2 blocks away in less than 20 seconds. Minutes later, that same Hellcat popped up on the other side of the German column, an angle deemed impossible to reach. Another shot rang out and another German tank was paralyzed, leaving the convoy in a state of absolute confusion and fear. For the Germans, this was psychological torture, as they could not lock onto a target that was constantly moving around. This phantom warfare destroyed the morale of the Panzer crews, leaving them feeling helpless against the invisible ghosts. This is why German intelligence mistakenly reported a full armored division was attacking them in the chaos. In reality, the force spinning them in circles was barely a reinforced company and a few speeding Buicks. Let us do the math, the arithmetic of life and death, as this will explain why speed matters more than plating. At 30 miles per hour, an M18 Hellcat covers 44 feet every single second on the battlefield. At combat idle, a Panther takes 15 to 20 seconds to turn 90 degrees to face a flank threat. In those critical 15 seconds, the M18 Hellcat has already sprinted over 600 feet, more than 200 yards. It means that while the German gunner is sweating frantically, cranking his hand, wheels, or waiting for the hydraulic pressure, it is a game of asymmetric geometry where the German has to track a target on an ever-widening arc. The German barrel is chasing the American exhaust pipe, always half a beat behind the actual position. Even more critical, while the Hellcat's 76mm gun struggled against the front of a Tiger at long range. German side armor was papered to a 76mm shell. The Hellcat maneuvered at high speed, keeping its gun trained. The German gunner faced an impossible calculus: predict the path of a target moving at 50 kilometers per hour. Usually, by the time the crusher is finally swept over the target area, the side of his own tank had already been punched. Of course, this tactic came with a cost, a terrible cost that the crews had to pay every day. The M18 had a design feature that was as distinct as it was insane. It was an open-top vehicle. It had no roof, so in the sub-zero weather of the Battle of the Bulge, open top meant the crew was exposed. The wind cut like a knife, freezing the skin instantly, but that physical pain was not the worst part of the ordeal. The worst part was that they were naked to the battlefield with absolutely nothing between them and the enemy fire. No roof meant that any sniper in a churched hour could easily pick off the commander or the loader with one shot. Any mortar shell exploding in the trees above or any grenade tossed from a window would rain shrapnel directly inside. In the fog, every shadow looked like a tiger, so the crew had to fight not just armor, but the bone-deep cold terror. It was a suffocating, terrifying experience, as even with speed in the fog you cannot see the road or the enemy. If you stop, you die, as Lieutenant Colonel Templeton knew. Static defense is deafened. Only constant manic movement meant survival. Every time the engine was turned off, it could be the end, so they kept the aircraft engines screaming day and night. If the Ardennes proved survivability in a corner, then the Italian campaign, 4 months later, unleashed the beast's true bloodlust. April 1945, seeing the Allies launch their final offensive, in Italy pushing hard against the crumbling line. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion was the only unit in the theater fully equipped with M18 Hellcats. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler, and at this stage the German army was breaking apart at the seams. After the Allies crossed the Apennine Mountains, the world opened up, revealing the Po Valley stretching out before them. This plain was like a giant billiard table, flat, open and stretching to the horizon with no obstacles in sight. No hedgerows, no ruins, just straight Roman roads and hard ground, providing a perfect surface for speed. It was a vast hunting ground designed by guards specifically for the Hellcat to roam free and destroy. Here combat ceased to be a careful ambush and turned into a chaotic metal screeching race for survival. The G is called it the rat race, as enormous German columns, trucks and tanks were fleeing north. They were trying to cross the Alps back to the Reich, and the Hellcats drove right alongside them. This time they did not hide behind cover to shoot and scoot like they did in the frozen forest. They drove parallel to the German columns on the highway, doing 30, even 40 miles per hour. Imagine the adrenaline of thousands of tons of steel tearing across plains, kicking up massive dust. The Hellcat commanders did not even order a halt to fire, keeping the pedal to the metal. Moving at highway speeds, their turrets were rained sideways directly at the fleeing Germans. 76mm guns roared on the move SCY thing through trucks like a combine harvester. The German gunners were hopeless, cranking their turrets, trying to catch blurs passing in the open. But geometry was even crueler here. When a Hellcat is doing 60 kilometers, angular velocity is high. By the time the German muzzle swung around, the Hellcat had already surged 200 yards ahead. Cutting in from the flank like a cowboy, firing a shot and speeding away, leaving burning wreckage. The 805th even did something that gave the Highcom and a headache. The M18 came with an official logo, a cartoon black cat biting a tank. The army brass thought it was too cartoonish, too undignified, and ordered it painted over, but the crews refused. It was a small mutiny, but symbolic, as they were driving the most fragile, dangerous vehicle in the war. If they were going to die in these tin boxes, they would keep their identity. That cartoon cat became their bared fangs, their totem, as the cats hunting the tigers. At the climax of the pursuit, they were moving so fast they could not even process prisoners. The Hellcat sponged through the German rearguard and overtook the vanguard. Crews did not have time to stop. They would just smash the German rifles, point their thumbs to the rear and scream at the terrified Germans to walk. This was not war anymore. It was a high-octane hunt, the absolute dominance of the predator over the prey. When the smoke cleared and the war ended, the cold statistic silenced everyone who had called the M18 a suicide weapon. In the European theater, the M18 Hellcat achieved the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer. The official record stands at 526 confirmed enemy kills, and its own losses were negligible by comparison. The overall exchange ratio was roughly 2.4 to 1, meaning for every Hellcat lost a point for German vehicles died. This was far superior to the famous Sherman and rivaled even the heaviest tanks. In fact, it was more efficient than the M10 Wolverine, which had significantly thicker armor. Noted military historian Steven Zaloga once critiqued the M18 as a poorly balanced design. He argued its success was due more to the elite training and fearlessness of its crews than the vehicle itself. Perhaps he is right. Those boys who drove the Hellcats were the elite of the elite. We cannot deny that it was the M18's extreme design that gave these elite crews a tactical choice no one else had. If they had been in a lumbering Sherman, no matter how skilled, they were meeting a Tiger in the fog of Noville would have meant praying for a ricochet. But because they were in a Hellcat, they had a choice. They could choose not to be hit. They could choose to exploit that gap of a few seconds between life and death, slip behind the Reaper and drive the dagger home. The story of the M18 Hellcat teaches us that in the brutal arithmetic of war, sometimes the thickest shield is not steel plate. It is the speed that ensures the enemy can never take aim. Those soldiers who once cursed the paper-thin armor ultimately used the thin skin on 88 kilometers per hour of fury to carve a path of survival out of certain death. This was not just a victory of machine, but of courage. Because the men who dared to drive an open-top sports car to hunt tigers, they were the true apex predators. In that age of colliding steel, they proved one thing: speed is the only armor that matters. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's deadliest miscalculations, smash that like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer. I will see you on the next battlefield.